Welcome back, everybody, to the Joey Osborne Show. I'm your host, Joey Osborne, and we are finally back. It's been a long time, but we are finally back. And let's get into it. I definitely took a little bit of a break, but something big of a doozy had to happen for me to come back. And the big news yesterday, 19-year-old head coach Mike Tomlin of the Pittsburgh Steelers resigned. The Pittsburgh Steelers are looking for a new head coach, something that hasn't happened since I was 3 years old, which is kind of nuts to think about, but I think a lot of Steelers fans right now are thinking, very happy about this. The on-field product was not very good in my opinion, especially these last couple of years, a complete, utter disaster. And I think we're all singing Kumbaya right now and being very happy about this. Well, obviously, I think also in that way, I feel a little bit uncertain because, this is the first time we haven't had a head coach in a long time. And Mike Tomlin, as much as I would say I have not liked his work in, the past couple of years, he was a good head coach and he's definitely one of the best to do it. So it's a little sad to see him go. It is something that was definitely overdue. So I think on Steelers' end of things, I think a lot of the fans are happy, especially after that horrid performance Monday night, losing 30-9 against the Texans. I will admit they were very close in that game up to the fourth quarter, mostly being 7-6 Texans the whole time. The defense, honestly, did really good in my opinion until toward the end they just kind of gave up there. But by that point it was the point they were going to give up, and the offense was just the offense has a lot of issues. I'm not sure it's all coaching. I think there's some structural issues, specifically at the wide receiver position. I think Rodgers was doing fine, but, other than DK Metcalf, the Steelers didn't really have any wide receivers. They just had, they chucked out Calvin Austin. I thought, Calvin Austin's a good wide receiver number 2. Then they got Martez Scantling, and then they got Adam Thielen. It was a whole mess of things, Probably should have kept Pickens. As much as I hate George Pickens, not a good guy. I think that's very clear. He definitely would have been a big help to the Steelers this season as being a good number 2 option for them, especially for Aaron Rodgers in the passing game. But now, obviously, with Tomlin's resignation, there's an opening, and most likely with that opening, a lot more other ones in the Steelers organization. I definitely can say right now, I'm sure. Terrell Austin, the DC, he's out of here. Probably Arthur Smith, too. Honestly, I think Arthur Smith probably did as best as he could with what he was given. I think a lot of this issues on offense, coaching, I don't think it was 100% like the greatest coaching. I think Arthur Smith was an okay offensive coordinator. Better than the last 2, but I think, he didn't really have weapons ever. He only had one good wide receiver, Running back-wise, there was just decent. Najee Harris just didn't live up to expectations. Jalen Warren had a very slow start this year. Toward the end, he was really playing well, but, he had a very slow start, I thought, in my opinion. Though Kenneth Gainwell, I thought all year did a great job, and hopefully the Steelers do bring him back. I think one guy that's not getting brought back would be the quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. I think this is probably the end, honestly, in my opinion. Probably for the Steelers, if Tomlin's not going to be here, Aaron Rodgers probably has no point of wanting to come back for the Steelers. And I think for the Steelers, that hopefully moves the needle to whoever the next quarterback will be. Maybe, Will Howard finally gets a shot here. Obviously, we did not get to see Will Howard at all this year. We were supposed to in the preseason. Then he gets hurt, out for training camp, and we didn't get to see him. Which I'm not sure, I'm not really too convinced he'll do that well. He definitely played well at Ohio State and Kansas State. I'll give him that, But college ball is different than the NFL, and I think in the NFL, it moves a lot quicker. And I think definitely in OTAs, it seemed like in June, before they got Rodgers, he was having trouble keeping up to that speed, Though obviously now he's going to have a whole season, off-season prepare. He's had a whole season sitting behind Aaron Rodgers, learning from him. So I think there was a shot Will Howard could be something. Honestly, in my opinion, I'm not really seeing it as much. I think Ohio State quarterbacks do not have the best, track record. You can talk about JT Barrett. You can talk about, obviously, Dwayne Haskins. This one didn't really pan out there. But, obviously he didn't really fully get as much time as you would have hoped. Obviously there's tragic events. So I'm not going to really say he was that bad. But, he didn't really get the best shot, in my opinion. I did think he had talent, but he didn't really get the best shot there. And I think 2022 he was supposed to before, obviously, what happened. But I think you can make points for other ones too. Justin Fields, look at Justin Fields. That one is just a mess, Really high potential, looked great, honestly, in my opinion. I thought he should have been in consideration for first overall pick in 2021. That was like my wild card kind of guy. I'm like, like everyone's like, oh, Trevor Lawrence. I agreed on Trevor Lawrence, but like then they're like, oh, Zach Wilson, oh, Trey Lance. It's like, well, those guys don't seem to be that good. I would go Fields over those two in a heartbeat. And that was something I was saying from that point. Obviously, podcast wasn't around that time, so you can't go back and fact check me on that one. But definitely that was something I thought. I don't get why you would draft those guys and not Justin Fields, but I think now, about 5 years now down the road from that, it makes a lot more sense why they didn't. Especially, I think when he was with the Bears, it was a lot up and down. So the Steelers, I thought, he played decent enough, but I expected more out of him, especially for him being, a fourth-year guy. I didn't really see what I wanted to see out of him. And then you see this whole circus of the Jets this year, this forward play from him. He got benched for Tyrod Taylor multiple times during the season. He just didn't play well, other than the first game against the Steelers. So, definitely right now, if you look at that, Ohio State doesn't have the best track record. Maybe that changes with Will Howard. CJ Stroud's been decent. He had a great rookie year. Last 2 years, I've been more like, I'm not sure what's going on here with Stroud, because I would say I really did think Stroud was the best one out of that class, and I think that first year he was. I think now, however, Bryce Young, that whole first year did very, very bad, Now he's a good quarterback, so he's been great ever since he got benched week 1 last year. He's been great, and he's been, honestly, East Carolina's franchise guy. He is, that was a crazy trade. They probably gave up a little too much for Bryce Young, but you know what? He's their franchise quarterback, and they haven't had that since Cam Newton. So, I really can't complain on that. But, with Stroud as well, it's an up and down thing. I think definitely last Monday, he played not very good at all. Had a couple fumbles there, but overall, he does, protect the ball. And overall, he does fine. So, maybe that's a better sign, because he is the most recent Ohio State quarterback to come out of there. So, we'll see on that one. But I'm not really too confident in Will Howard because of the Ohio State thing. I will say this, though. Julian's saying, I will say that I think he is the kind of guy that does flip the switch on that Ohio State quarterbacks aren't that good in the NFL thing. I think Stroud's made at least a little bit of strides to maybe, they can at least be good. Not great, but good. And I think, Sayan's a great quarterback. I think we're going to see this. He's obviously not coming this draft, potentially next year in 2027. But most likely in 2028. But the way he played this year as a freshman was very impressive for, Ohio State, and I think that could break the mold. But when it comes to Will Howard, when I look at him, I just think, good college quarterback, not going to work in the NFL. Maybe a backup. If he's lucky, he'll be a good backup for years to come. But most likely, currently at the moment, I would say he is probably Steelers quarterback 1. Obviously, we'll see how the draft plays out, but this is a very weak quarterback class outside of Mendoza, who obviously will be the first overall pick. The Las Vegas Raiders will select him, get their franchise guy, and then any other team needs a quarterback. You're going to have to wait to 2027. The 2027, I think, will be a very good quarterback class, but, definitely for the Steelers, not what you want to hear, especially after all the quarterback issues from year to year. But now, moving on here, obviously, we talk about a little bit of our story. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers was definitely not back. I think he came to play for Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin's gone now. He's probably gone with it and probably retired. And I think Cam Hayward, potentially another guy, could retire. Hopefully he doesn't. I think that's some of the Steelers need in that locker room to help with the transition and help get them sold on him. Definitely he was a great resource, especially leadership-wise for the Steelers in the past, and the hope would be with him, he could come back, especially since he played great again this year. He's 36 and he's still playing great. I think he's one of the Steelers' best players on defense. And he's 36 years old, which is kind of crazy. But a lot of changes, but the big one, obviously, is who's going to be the new head coach. And, we can obviously, talk about more and more how Mike Tomlin didn't do a good job in the last couple of years, so you can go on and on about that. But, I think by this point, I think it's more important that we talk about, who is going to be the next Steelers head coach. And I have a couple names here, and I think there's a lot of great options. I think overall, outside in this coaching source, there's a lot of great pieces here a lot of guys you could look at and be like, you know what, I like that. I think this guy could be a great coach. I think there's multiple of them out there. And we're going to talk about a couple of them here as well. So let's first start off here with the big one. Obviously, we heard this name pretty early on. Yesterday, we were hearing potentially. Today, we've already heard they've scheduled the interview. He is coming in. And that is Chris Shula, the defensive coordinator from the Los Angeles Rams. Obviously, his grandpa's the legendary Coach Shula for the Dolphins, the undefeated season in 1972. And he was the longtime head coach for the Dolphins. His grandson has obviously been working for the Rams the last 2 years as the defensive coordinator. And obviously, look at that Rams defense. They've been spectacular so far this year. They've done good every year, in my opinion. I think definitely last year they played very well. Definitely, obviously, they lost Raheem Morris to the Falcons for the head coaching job as a DC, and they get Chris Shula, and that defense, honestly, it looks just as good, if not better, with Shula. And I think, he's a very young guy, obviously, in his 30s. He clearly relates well with his players. I think, obviously, for the Steelers, that is something they want. They seem to hire young guys. The last two head coaches, whenever they were hired, Tomlin was in his 30s, and so was Cowell. So clearly, they're probably hiring someone on the younger side, probably in the 30s, and then most likely they usually go a defensive-minded coach. And I would assume, once again, they do that. Maybe they benefit a little more from an offensive-minded coach, but I think they go defense. And I think Chris Shula is the top guy on that list. Obviously, looking at, this is some of the stats to back up his claim, really, for potentially being the Steelers' next head coach is for his defense. Obviously, this year, they're strong in a lot of key metrics. Obviously, points per game, they're at 20.4 points per game on the defense. So that's pretty good for a defense, especially in a high-scoring NFL. They play well, and they're one of the best ones in the NFL. So I think, obviously, with him, and he's around Sean McVay. I think that's the other big thing. Sean McVay is probably a top 2, top 3 head coach in the NFL, and, he has multiple good coaches that came from him who have now gone on head coach and they've been good, like Kevin O'Connor, for instance. He came from Sean McVay, and he's been one of the best coaches in the NFL. He's probably a top 10 coach, and he's great at developing quarterbacks. So Mike McCarthy is, McCarthy's a little bit of a pump, not Mike McCarthy, but, he's been a little up for him. We'll see on that one, how that goes, but, 9, but we'll see how he goes on that. But overall, he gets the best out of quarterbacks, especially Kirk Cousins last year and Sam Darnold. Within the last 2 years prior to this year, he's been able to, get the best out of them. So I'm interested to see what, obviously, he can do well. And then talk about Matt LaFleur as well, another guy out of that coaching tree with the Packers. He's done a great job. He did some great work for Aaron Rodgers when him and Devontae were there. He's done a great job developing Jordan Love. Jordan Love is probably a top 10 quarterback now. I would say maybe at like 10, but, he is a top 10 quarterback. And I think that Packers team, they're always competitive. They're always in the playoffs. So when you look at the McVay tree, for the most part, other than a couple exceptions, I would say Raheem Morris is just middle of the road, and I would say, obviously, Ben Staley was not good. But overall, when you look at that coaching tree, it's a very solid group, and it's a group of guys that do succeed at the next level. So, especially when it comes to head coaching, and I think Chris Shula is probably one of the most brightest minds to come out of that tree. So I think for the Steelers, it's a great fit. He's a defensive guy. This is a defensive-minded team, and I think he's got a young fire. He probably wants to win, and I think he can probably better relate to a lot of the players, especially the younger ones, than Mike Tomlin did, because this is just a guy who's a little bit younger. He's a bit more around analytics. Obviously, being McVay, he's around a lot of the new big trends. And the other thing is, too, he has connections to great offensive minds that he can bring in as an OC. And I think we're going to talk about one of them later, who technically at the moment is a Steelers head coaching candidate. I personally don't think he'll be the job, just because he hasn't been a coordinator yet. But I think if Shula gets the job, this guy I'll talk about a little bit later will most likely be the Steelers offensive coordinator, and I think it'll be a great hire at that. But in my opinion here, Chris Shula should be the guy. But there's a couple other guys got that button. There's another really good option here, and that is the former Miami Dolphins head coach and current Vikings defensive coordinator, Brian Flores, who is a guy I do really like. I think he's an awesome coach. I think definitely, throwing the tank for Tua, he got that whole very bad Dolphins team, a lot of bad players on that team. He got them to win games, and, he probably overachieved a lot. And I think it really showed how good of a coach he was. I think, whole firing thing, it's all up in the air, like what all costs that. It's a very confusing thing, but I think you can't deny he did a great job with a very bad team in Miami. And I think obviously, if you don't know, but Brian Flores, after he was fired, was brought in to the Steelers for 1 year as a linebackers coach and probably some pro to DC before he got the job in Minnesota. He currently is in, and that defense ranks as one of the best in the NFL. And they're very good specifically in disguising their coverages. They blitz a lot, but they do a lot of things differently. Like they'll blitz a lot, they'll disguise their coverages very well, and it's, for an offense, that is one of the toughest defenses to play against. And I think for the Steelers, one of the biggest issues on that side of the ball on the defense is they're using outdated tactics that just don't really fit in with the new modern NFL. The way offenses go, scoring about, the Steelers defense currently has a lot of holes. I think they have a lot of talent on that defense, but I think schematically, the schematic leaves a lot of holes that teams, they completely understand because the Steelers have done the same thing for so long. They know exactly how to, execute against it and win. And I think especially saw that in that Ravens game. There was 3 giant blown coverages in that game that 2 of them led to touchdowns. And, I think that was less a talent issue. That was more the scheme. There was a lot. Patrick Queen was on Zay Flowers one time. There's no reason a linebacker should be on a wide receiver, especially one as fast as Zay Flowers. So I think, schematically, he's going to fix a lot for the Steelers if they go that way. I think he's a great fit, He's a very definitely very similar to Mike Tomlin, very similar personalities, maybe not with the Tomlinisms and stuff, but he's definitely a very gritty, hard-nosed kind of guy, and I think that's a great fit for Pittsburgh. And I would say Brian Flores is my number 2 guy, and honestly, I think if you get Brian Flores, that's going to be a great head coach, and I think that's going to be a great fit for the Steelers. I would say, they'll be set up well. The only issue I have for Flores is less that his defense is great. It's more just, offense-wise, he doesn't really have the connections that Shula would have. Shula obviously is in the LA Rams locker room. He knows a lot of bright, young, up-and-coming offensive guys who are working for McVay. And while, Kevin O'Connell has some, he has some good ones in there, definitely offensive-wise. Definitely he knows how to develop quarterbacks, and they got some good offensive coaches. I just don't think, Brian Flores obviously knows those guys and probably would bring one of them in. I just don't think they are to the same pedigree as what you see with the LA Rams and Sean McVay and his coaching staff. So I think that's the one thing that, maybe, sits him against. But I think the one advantage he has over most of the other candidates is he's a former head coach. He has actual head coaching experience, and he's shown he can perform well in bad scenarios. Obviously, I just might as well take for Tua. But, the Dolphins, even after Tua, they didn't have the best roster, and yet he got the most out of them. There's always been some confusing as to why, he was fired, but, that's we're probably never going to figure out what exactly happened there. But I think overall he's a great fit for the Steelers, and I think, definitely he could be the guy as well, and that was something definitely I would put my vote of approval on as well. The next one here was definitely another big name here we've been hearing a lot about. If you're looking at any head coaching sources, about Clint Kubiak, current offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks. Obviously, they're the ones in the NFL. Sam Darnold's playing great. Jackson Smith-Njigba, one of the best receivers in the NFL, and clearly, they play well. And he's done very well. He's been OC multiple places. Minnesota in 2021 did a decent job there. They were 11th in passing, so the top 15% in passing. Definitely wasn't a job that got him crazy good record, but it was something people looked at, and they're like, yeah, that looks pretty good. Then he was obviously with San Francisco for a little bit, loaned out under Kyle Shanahan for a little bit, and then last year got hired as the Saints OC. And obviously that one didn't go as well, but then again, was not the best talent. Derek Carr, obviously, way past his prime, wasn't playing well. Chris Olave kept getting thrown hospital balls and kept getting hurt, and he nearly retired on the offseason. So they had a lot of issues, especially injury-wise, so you really didn't get to see the best out of him just because of a lot of the snares that happened on there, especially injuries, but I think just a declining quarterback play as well. You didn't really get to see what he could do fully, and I think definitely he was the kind of guy that people looking at you need to get Clint Kubiak. Honestly, I'm not sure why the Steelers didn't do that for the offensive coordinator. Not a shot off of Smith or anything, but I think Kubiak would have probably been a better fit to get yourself more acclimated with the new modern NFL. Especially for a team like the Steelers who clearly needed it. I think Arthur Smith, could go to someplace else, and it wouldn't be a problem just because a lot of other teams aren't really setting their ways into the old past like the Steelers were. So I think he probably would have, been good, probably a little better other places, but, it is what it was. And obviously this year for Seattle, one of the top offenses in the NFL, I think highest scoring in my understanding, they're the highest scoring at the moment, and, they have a 14-3 record, and they're the one seed in the NFL. And Sam Darnold is playing spectacular, than one bad game against the LA Rams, Jack Smith-Njigba is the best receiver in the NFL probably at the moment, and he's gone off. And this is a team that lost DK Metcalf, they lost Geno Smith, the quarterback, they lost multiple pieces, they lost Tyler Lockett, who was taking a step back, but, still a crucial piece in the prior year. And they're one of the best offenses in the NFL right now. And I think that tells you, he was able to take, a situation that probably wasn't the best situation coming in. Obviously, they added Cooper Kupp, which, that's a good wide receiver, but, he's getting old now, can't produce the way he was. That's why the Rams cut him. And then got Devontae Adams. But, definitely he did a lot of good things with a roster that, is not probably on paper, didn't look like it'd be a world beater. But, here it is, one of the best offenses in the NFL. And I think for the Steelers, they obviously usually go defensive-minded, but I think they've had offensive struggles definitely significantly in the last year. And they could lean to someone on offense, and I think Clint Kubiak could be the guy that they do look at this year. And I think he definitely would be he's a great hire, in my opinion. I would also say, another guy I would say the Steelers get him a good hire, and I think definitely he fixes a lot of problems offensively. The only thing is that, obviously, he's got to find a strong defensive mind. Not that he can't find it. Obviously, Seattle's, their head coach is more defensive-minded kind of guy, so they probably could find it. But, that is something to maybe think about as well. Defensively, what can he bring? Especially since Pittsburgh has such a big emphasis on the defense. I think all Rooney today in the press conference was emphasizing that, he wanted to make sure the defense was the Steelers' defense. And obviously, they kind of were, I'm not saying they were getting away from it, but I think they didn't adapt the model of the Steelers defense to the modern NFL, and they kept it kind of, they kept it the same, and that's why they've had so many problems with defense. I think, then, bringing in aging guys, Darius Slay, that was definitely not a good move, He clearly had lost a step while he played good last year with Philly, he clearly was about to lose a step, and then this year he lost like 3. But, there was always some benefits for that. Obviously, he got to mentor JPJ. Same with Ramsey, when they brought Ramsey in, he got to mentor Jerry Porter Jr. And now Jerry Porter Jr. was probably a top 5 cornerback in the NFL, the way he, just doesn't let wide receivers win against him. So I think definitely you could look at that, but, definitely Steelers, they're very old set in their ways, and I think they clearly have to go more modern, and all 3 of these options I've listed so far are very modern and good fits for the modern NFL. And then the next one here, we're going to skip over this one guy real quick, but this one's a dark horse, but I could see the Steelers doing this. I would think it'd be a bad one. But the former Packers and Cowboys head coach, Mike McCarthy, he's, obviously been out this whole year after a contract dispute with Jerry Jones. Obviously, this guy has got a great track record, obviously, Super Bowl winning head coach, he's played very well. He's developed quarterbacks. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers is the big one he developed. But, when he was at Dallas, got probably the best work out of Dak Prescott any other quarterback has. So I think definitely you can talk about that, look at that, and be like, yeah, I think he's a good fit for it. And obviously, I think he's a Pittsburgh guy. He's from the area. He's Catholic, which probably is going to help him out a good bit with the Roonies. But, if you look at that, on paper, he's probably a good fit. The issue is, he's up there in age. You're probably not having him for that long. And I think the Steelers are looking for someone more in the long term and a guy who really is more adapted to the NFL. And I think McCarthy is more on the way out than he would be on the way in, especially when it comes to the modern NFL schematics and coaching. Not to say he's not a good coach. He is a good coach. I just think, if you look at him, you want something a little more forward thinking, and you want a guy who can really, adapt well to the modern NFL. And while McCarthy does well at the moment, he's not really on the innovative side. And I think for the Steelers, in the position they're in, knowing the way they, keep coaches around, they need the innovator. They need a guy who can innovate the offense and be on the cutting edge of the new trends in the NFL. Obviously, you probably can't get a Ben Johnson. Obviously, you're not getting him. But if you can get a guy with the same type of mindset who really, goes out, he's innovative. He'll change new things. He'll go new ways to attack you, and he does well on offense. And I think, that's when they need to get a coach like that. Doesn't matter if it's offense or defense, but they need a coach who has that mindset. And I think McCarthy just doesn't have that mindset. And for me, I'm out on him because of that. I just think, wouldn't be the guy I pick. Obviously, the Steelers probably could be the guy they pick, but we'll see. And then the last one we're going to talk about, this one's the other dark horse, and I think this guy most likely will be the offensive coordinator if Shula gets hired rather than the head coach, but a lot of people like this guy. He's getting a lot of interviews, and that is Nate Shilhassi. I think that's how I say his last name. The pass game coordinator and offensive assistant for the Los Angeles Rams. Obviously, that offense needs no introduction. Matt Stafford having an MVP level year, Puka Nacua and Devontae Smith playing great. I think, obviously, if you look at them, that is a team, you envy yourself on offense. I think, obviously, Sean McVay has something to do with it. But a lot of the guys he's got behind him are very smart, innovative guys, and you've seen it work out. I think definitely, obviously, Kevin O'Connell is the big one on offense. Matt LaFleur before him. And, Liam Cohen, obviously, first year with the Jags. Look at the turnaround job he did on them. And look at how good Trevor Lawrence has been this year. Obviously, the playoff game wasn't his best showing, but he's played so much better than in previous years, playing a lot more like the, Trevor Lawrence we expected coming out of college. So I think definitely, the Rams have that great pipeline. And obviously, the Rams have been one of the best teams in offense, and he's done a great job with that. Obviously, being a passing game coordinator, he is one of the guys who goes in, he helps set up the passing offense and makes sure it works efficiently and effectively. And between a lot of the people, around the NFL, they look at this guy and that's the next by mind. They really do say that, this is the next guy who's going to really change offense and is going to do great things, And they've been saying that, and he's getting a ton of interviews right now. Well, he's probably not getting any of the jobs, just because, this is his first time. They just kind of want to get to know the guy, see what he can bring, So I don't think he's going to be a head coach. He'll probably most likely be an OC just because he hasn't been a coordinator yet. But the Steelers obviously have already put in, the request to interview him, and I think it's a great request to go in. I think definitely this guy is going to be very innovative. If they finally decide on the Steelers side, you know what, we want to emphasize offense, this would be the guy. This would be the guy who could do that for them. So I think we'll see what happens there. I think most likely, in my opinion, obviously, he'd fix Pittsburgh's offense, make a lot more cutting edge. Mon would probably have, better job on it, most likely. Well, maybe Town may be lacking next year. They probably could do a decent job, even with great schematics. But I would say most likely, in my opinion, well, this guy is a candidate, and I like him a lot. I just don't think he's fully ready for a head coaching job yet. And I think just because he hasn't been a coordinator, I think he needs to be a coordinator at least 1 year before he's really considered to this point. But I think if, Chris Shula gets the job, which it seems like right now he's the front runner, in my honest opinion, he should be the guy for the Steelers. I think he'd be a spectacular coach. I would say 100% Shilhassi is definitely getting the offensive coordinator job, and he's going to do a great job for the Steelers, who have had a lack of offense for a number of years now. Honestly, probably you could say since Todd Haley got fired. That's when it really started lacking. I think when Fichtner got hired, that was the first step of it really not doing well. Then the whole Matt Canada fiasco, that really killed it. And Alvaro Smith, well, he's gone better. It's just not where it needs to be. I think we can just say, we kind of, I kind of thought Arthur Smith would do a lot better job than what he did. Well, I don't think he did a bad job. I don't think he did that great of a job either. I think it was just kind of middle of the road. But yeah, that's definitely the top ones in my opinion. I've been looking at obviously some other ones you've been seeing thrown around. Chargers DC, Jesse Mentor, another guy. He's going to get an interview. We'll see how it goes. But I would say another guy probably get higher. I would say some of the options I mentioned already. I would go with the options I mentioned already. The McCarthy before him. You got the two-time coach of the year. Recently fired Browns coach Kevin Stefanski. Another guy I think is a great coach. I think just, being stuck in Cleveland getting stuck with Deshaun Watson. I think that was the issue more than anything for Stefanski. I think another guy who could be a great hire But I don't think the Steelers are going to go his way. But, I think it's good to at least mention him, get his name out, because I think he should be getting another head coaching job pretty soon. And I think he could do a really great job. Like, this is a guy who took the Browns to the playoffs, That doesn't really happen to the Browns. They don't really go to the playoffs. And he was able to do that. And he got great work out of Baker Mayfield for that first year until he tore his labrum. So I think definitely, I think for the Browns, he's probably the best coach they've had ever since they came back in the NFL. And I think he's a guy that people really should be looking at. Another guy, people could be looking at, especially for the Steelers job potentially, is former Dolphins coach Mike McDaniel. This is a guy I feel like more as if should probably go back to coordinating for year two. I think this guy just seems to be a little more fit to be a coordinator than to be a head coach. He's probably more like some other McDaniel's for the Patriots, went to the Raiders, didn't go well, and oil for that he went to the Broncos, and he just wasn't a good head coach, but he's a great offensive coordinator. Look what he did with Tom Brady, and then he's back with Drake May now, and they've done crazy good. I think that team's exceeded expectations in every single form, especially on offense, and I think definitely clearly shows, there was just guys out there who are better as coordinators, and I think Mike McDaniel is one of those guys. He's just better at being a coordinator. And I think, in my opinion, he's probably one of the best offensive coordinators in the NFL. He's one of the brightest offensive minds. But I just don't think he's really head coach material. But I will say this, that the Steelers could get him as the OC. He's definitely someone they should be looking out for. So that's pretty much going to do it for this episode here. I want to thank you guys all for tuning in and watching if you're on YouTube or listening in on Spotify, Apple Music, or any of the other, podcast platforms I'm on. Definitely appreciate you guys, and we're probably gonna bring this back a little more here now. We've been lacking a good bit for a while, but something had to get me out of it, and this thing did. Obviously, Mike Tomlin resigning was kind of huge. Obviously, somebody goes on his own volition, which is a little surprising as well. But definitely, we're back, and we're gonna try to get more consistent here. So, thank you guys for listening, and have a great day.